We'll call to order the Shasta County Air Pollution Control Board meeting for Tuesday, September 25th, 2012. The Board of Supervisors does not receive any compensation or stipend as a result of convening as the Shasta County Air Pollution Control Board. Our first item is the public comment period. We ask the speakers come forward and give their name. Each speaker is allocated 3 minutes to speak. Comments should be limited to the matters within the jurisdiction of this board. Pursuant to the Brown Act, action or discussion cannot be taken on open time matters other than receive comments and refer for necessary follow-up if needed. I don't have any requests to speak during open time at this time. I do have other requests for later. Does anybody wish to speak during open time? Mr. Mullen, from behind you. You wish to speak during open time?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good morning, board members, Mr. Lees, Mr. Cruz, ladies. My name is Bart Lovett. I'm responding to the climate action plan that you are possibly getting into. To do so, I have a small, short story to begin to make my point. About 15 years ago, a young science student in South Dakota, as a project, went to make a determination if a substance named dihydrogen monoxide should be removed as a dangerous substance. So he polled about 10 people, and asked them if it should be removed, explaining to them that it creates rust, it can erode the ground, it is found in cancer cells, it can harm you, it can burn you in a gaseous state, and that it can erode the soil. He asked 10 people. 7 of these people said yes, it should be removed. 2 people said no. The third man said no, dihydrogen monoxide should not be removed. It's H2O, water. The point is that is junk science, the way we have been explained to it. Now, as a climate action plan, geologic history tells us that the Earth has been warming and cooling for millions of years. This is a natural phenomenon, the way the Earth cleans itself and heals itself. And in this time, man thinks by throwing, rules and regulations that we can clean up our air. Many things have been blamed to the air pollution, such as automobiles, industrial manufacturing. It's even gotten down to where the cattlemen have been blamed through how do we want to call this, cattle flatulence or bovine flatulence. All these things have been blamed on air pollution, when in reality the Earth will heal itself by means of storms, rain, wind, and cleaning it up. So the regulations that you've put forth will not do as much as Mother Nature itself. And we're looking at an economic issue, much less than a health issue or an environmental issue. And I hearken back to the thing called the spotted owl and the economic havoc that it played upon our system. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Levitt. Anybody else during open time? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. The following consent calendar items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested person may request that an item be removed from the consent calendar for later discussion.
Move approval of the consent calendar as distributed to the board and the public.
Second. Supervisor Haas.
Yes, I will be recusing on C1 because I was not in attendance on the 26th of June.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries as stated. We now move on to the regular calendar, R1. Receive a presentation regarding the Shasta Regional Climate Action Plan. Mr. Mull.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Russ Mull, Air Pollution Control Officer. I wanted to preface our presentation today with a little trip down memory lane. As you recall, or probably don't recall, a year ago we came to you and said we would like to do a climate action plan. And let me just describe to you what our vision here is and what our intent was and still is. As you know, California has passed several global greenhouse gas laws, AB 32 being the first one, and since then there's been several others. We weren't interested at the time, and we're not interested now in arguing the merits of greenhouse gases, whether or not there's global warming or not. That's not our job. That argument occurs in the legislature and between organizations that work with the legislature. What we do is when a law is sent to us, we try to figure out how to make it work best for our community. And what we saw on the greenhouse gas laws was a tremendous effort by the state of California to impose their vision of greenhouse gas compliance onto the state as a whole. And we thought that that was going to be problematic for Shasta County, and we thought it was going to be problematic for people who are doing economic development projects or projects that have to go through CEQA. So when a project came to us, and in fact, I'll use the example, we had a project that had gone several years through the process, and the minute the greenhouse gas laws went into effect, that project got sued on greenhouse gas compliance. So what we knew was that projects were going to get hung up based on greenhouse gases, because every time a new law gets passed, that's what occurs. And so we saw it pretty important to put together an accurate inventory and an accurate set of mitigations, albeit not complete, that applicants could use in their environmental documentation when they go through the land use process, so that it doesn't get all mungled up and bungled up in this sort of never-ending argument back and forth. We wanted a very black and white, here's how much we generate, here's what it means, here's what you're doing, here's how you solve that problem. So that was number one. Number two was to give each local jurisdiction the option to participate, as well as the various industries in the community, forestry, mining, power. We invited all those folks to participate in the process, and so we could put that together and get their views on their impacts and how it would affect them. And then lastly, we are very concerned that the state of California, who has allocated quite a lot of money for grants to local communities, was spreading money around the state as quickly as possible with the earmark that your plans had to be consistent with their goals. And I believe our local RTPA has taken quite a lot of those funds. So our feeling was that it would be better to spend our money locally for a plan that was consistent with what our needs were in the community, rather than a couple of years from now have the state of California come in and say, here's what you ought to be doing. It's consistent with what we want. So that's why we're here today. Adam Feisler of my staff will introduce our consultant. He has been the manager of the project, has worked tirelessly for a year, and has withstood the various slings and arrows of greenhouse gases from various members of the community. But again, that was not our purpose. Once the law is passed, our only obligation is to deal with the law. If you have any questions, we'll be glad to answer them. Probably best to wait till the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mull.
Good morning, members of the board, Chairman Modi, distinguished members of the public. Just as Mr. Mull said, I've worked tirelessly for 2 years, actually, to get this to where we're at today, and ready to hand over to the districts to do, or the cities and the county to do what they see fit with it, either adopt it or not adopt it. It's their choice. It's completely voluntary, just like the rest of the measures. We did work with a Regional Climate Action Plan working group, which included members of the industry. Members of the public even were allowed to attend, and we welcome them in. And that's where we are here today. We're here. Cully Thomas, AECOM Project Manager, will present how it was developed, and I'm here for any questions. Also want to make a note to members of the public that all the comments that were submitted by yesterday have been distributed to the board members. So here's Cully Thomas.
Thank you.
Chairman Modi, members of the board. My name is Kelly Thomas, project manager for AECOM, the consultant firm that assisted the district in preparing the climate action plan. I'll give a hopefully brief presentation today and then answer any questions you may have. First, I'm going to talk about the greenhouse gas emissions, the inventory, discuss how they're developed, discuss differences and some terms used within, and then discuss the measures that are contained in the Regional Climate Action Plan, how they're developed, and how they reduce emissions to a level by 2020 that's in line with state recommendations. And then finally, end with a discussion of next steps and how we move towards adoption and implementation. Okay, so greenhouse gas inventories and forecasts are the foundation of any climate action plan. It's basically going out and looking at what is the baseline amount of emissions in a community and how those are projected to grow over time. We prepared inventories and forecasts for the unincorporated county and the 3 cities. And throughout the document, the whole document is organized in that way. There's an introduction followed by chapters for each jurisdiction. Greenhouse gas inventories are developed using a fairly simple formula, at least in the basics is simple. Emissions equals activity data times the emission factor. Activity data, for example, is kilowatt hours of electricity used per year. Emissions factor is how much emissions is released per kilowatt hour. And that varies by, in electricity example, it varies by the utility. PG&E has a different emission factor than Reading Electric, different than Shasta Lake. So that's the basics. We did this for a large number of sectors. We did building energy, which is electricity, natural gas, transportation, which is gasoline and diesel, solid waste. Primarily, we're looking at the methane component that leaves landfills after decomposition. We looked at water, both the water consumption and wastewater treatment. Energy, it's basically energy related to those and the emissions related to that energy. We looked at off-road, both off-road vehicles, construction vehicles, and also recreational boating and other recreational vehicle energy use. We looked at stationary sources, basically industrial process energy used. And the last 2 categories, agriculture, looking at nitrogen emissions and methane emissions from agriculture, as well as agricultural vehicle operation. And then the final sector, forestry, we looked solely at the emissions from harvest, from cutting and hauling logs. The distinction here in the inventory, we talk about a total inventory and a jurisdictional inventory. Basically, the difference is, we'll go back and forth. The pie chart on the right in this slide has stationary. It shows that that's 73% of total emissions. The jurisdictional, we removed industrial emissions, so stationary source emissions, agriculture and forestry, because the jurisdictions don't have authority over those. A lot of the industrial processes are regulated by state laws and are also being dealt with by a different greenhouse gas emission reduction program that's led by the state. Agriculture and forestry, the district chose to pull those, again, for lack of jurisdiction over those activities. Another term that we used here is business as usual versus adjusted business as usual. Again, going back, there's the baseline in 2008. And then business as usual is if everything stayed the same, if the amount of energy used in a house stayed the same going forward, And we just based growth on population growth and employment growth. That's a business as usual trajectory. So in 2020, emissions grow to a certain level. In 2035, they grow to a higher level. Adjusted business as usual is, okay, what's the effect of all these state regulations and actions, such as the fuel efficiency requirements that the state and federal government are requiring, or the low carbon fuel standard, all of these actions, the renewable portfolio standard, which cleans up electricity generation as well. All of these state and federal actions are actually going to reduce local emissions. In many ways, that's actually a benefit to from a greenhouse gas reduction standpoint. It's a benefit because it's not something the local jurisdictions have to do, and you're going to see a reduction in emissions just naturally from that. So the state and federal actions contained in the adjusted business as usual include, as I was saying, the vehicle efficiency standards, low carbon fuel standard, other passenger vehicle efficiency programs, heavy duty vehicle efficiency programs, and then notably the increase in strength of the California Energy Code, or known as Title 24, the renewable portfolio standard, which requires 33% renewable electricity by 2020, and then Senate Bill 375, which is a direction by the state to reduce per capita vehicle emissions. And then finally, the federal and state light bulb efficiency requirements. All right, so now...
Excuse me, under
Sure.
SB 375, you've mentioned, you've listed county and Reading only. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, what we did was we took the position if a jurisdiction needed to take, SB 375 is a little bit different from the others, as is 1109. The actions on the top are regulations that are being implemented today. And that there's already a lot of inertia behind those regulations. SB 375 has been adopted, but it has yet to test the time, stand a test of time, whether it will be effective or not. It's a regulation that doesn't have any teeth to it. It's more, we didn't want the jurisdictions who did not need to rely on it to rely on that in the future. So.
And so Shasta Lake City and Anderson are excluded for what reason?
Their emissions portfolio is so different that they didn't need to take credit for SB 375.
They don't reach a threshold necessary then?
They basically, their transportation emissions are different. The Reading and Shasta County produce a lot more vehicle trips, so taking advantage of SB 375 was advantageous to them. All right, so now I'll present the greenhouse gas inventory and forecasts for the individual jurisdictions. Just quickly, the total inventory you can see in Shasta County, stationary sources provides the vast majority. When you shift to jurisdictional, it's building energy and transportation emissions. In 2008, it was roughly 600,000 metric tons, projected to increase to 126,000 by 2020, or actually, if you apply state and federal actions, it's actually expected to reduce by to 505,000, and similarly, it grow in 35, but be reduced again by the state and federal actions. The City of Anderson, they actually, this is the city, they don't actually have any identified stationary source emissions, so the total and the jurisdictional are the same. Energy and transportation is larger, and energy is the second largest sector. Similar story here. a decrease. When you look at the adjusted business as usual, there's an expected decrease in emissions in 2020 and even going out to 2035. City of Reading, this is the total. There's a small portion of stationary source emissions that is removed. And in the jurisdictional inventory, again, it's transportation and energy related emissions. And going to baseline roughly around 1 million and increasing to just over 1 million in 2020. State actions reducing again. And Shasta Lake has a fairly large portion, almost a third of the baseline emissions were stationary. This is interesting where a very large portion of the city's emissions are from the energy sector, and a very small or a smaller portion than normal is produced by transportation emissions. And the same pattern seen in the city.
I noticed that for Shasta Lake and Anderson and for the county, you had 2020 and 2035. For the city of Reading, you didn't have 2035.
That's correct. That was the city's decision to limit it to 2020 specifically. Okay, now we'll move on to the greenhouse gas reduction measures. So we have our baseline inventory and forecast. The challenge then was to develop a set of measures that reduce emissions by 2020 15% below the 2008 baseline. The measures in the climate action plans within the document contain an estimate of greenhouse gas reduction for 2020 and 2035 in the jurisdictions that had 2 target years. It has a measure description, which basically says why it's important and what the jurisdiction will do to implement it. The implementation actions go one step further and define the action steps, a time range for implementation, and responsibility to the department or other agencies responsible. And then finally, progress indicators to monitor progress over time to make sure that the plan is on track. The measures were developed through basically by looking at the existing programs that each jurisdiction already had implemented. A large number of programs from energy efficiency, water conservation to bicycle lane development were already underway. We took credit for any of those that we could identify and take credit for. We then worked with we reviewed best management practices and worked with the jurisdictions to select measures that fit their local context, their jurisdiction's characteristics. Beyond that, we worked with each measure and the staff to fine-tune the assumptions in each measure so that they were realistic for each jurisdiction. For example, number of bike lanes, we checked with the city planners to make sure that was going forward. With electric City of Reading utility, we worked with them to make sure that their energy efficiency programs were properly reflected in the document. Finally, taking the draft measures and now they're in the public review and in your review, and ultimately those would be adopted with any revisions that you suggest. Okay, so quickly again, I'll go through the summary of the measures, spend a little more time on the unincorporated measures. In Shasta County unincorporated climate action plan, there's building energy measures, water measures, solid waste, transportation, and carbon sequestration measures. Essentially in building energy, we have energy retrofit, so a lot of existing buildings that could improve their energy efficiency. The measure basically has incentives and outreach programs to to encourage the adoption of retrofit in those buildings. And again, I'll just jump back. All of these measures are voluntary unless required by the state, by some other state mandate that people do them. So there was a strong emphasis in every jurisdiction that these are voluntary measures, so emphasis on incentives and outreach programs. New construction is basically implementation of the state energy code moving forward as it strengthens. Commercial indoor lighting is a voluntary measure. Energy efficient appliance in residential homes, that's a voluntary measure that will basically take advantage of the existing rebates and other incentives. Smart grid integration is voluntary, and for those homes and businesses who choose to implement that technology, there's a reduction associated with that. And then the last two are renewable energy programs for people who are going to install those systems on their buildings or businesses or homes.
Could you give us a definition of what smart grid is?
Smart grid is it's basically the new energy system where there are multiple levels. There's inside the home or the business, there's a lot of opportunity for people to install energy management systems where you can monitor energy use and use that information to reduce consumption. On the external, there's also potentially through the smart meters that we've all heard of, there's the ability to relay building level data to the utility and backwards. But we're more focusing on the in-building, the voluntary in-building component that people could better manage their energy inside their buildings if they so choose. Water is basically energy water fixtures and fixture fittings, retrofit to improve water conservation. Solid waste, lumber waste diversion ordinance. The California Green Building Code requires lumber waste from construction and demolition to be increased, I believe, to 65%, and this measure reflects that. Methane recovery, where a lot of the reductions come from, for 2020 at least, is action that the county has already taken by putting a methane capture system on the landfill, central landfill. Transportation, bike lane expansion, and commute trip reduction, both existing programs that either the county or CERTA, my acronyms are outdated, CERTA are focusing on. And then carbon sequestration is basically just the component of new street trees or trees planted associated with new development and taking credit for that, the carbon sequestration from those trees. This graph shows that basically the county achieves its 15% below 2008 target in 2020. There's a target, 2035 target of 49% below 2008 levels that is not achieved. This is a very hard target to achieve at the local level without additional state provision of incentives or if they're going to change the regulatory structure. It's very difficult for a local jurisdiction to achieve this because of the cost or just the level of jurisdiction that city or county has. For CEQA streamlining, the 2020 target is currently the important one to achieve. So development to 2020 could be covered by this plan under the current state guidance. I'll go quickly through the city results. They're very similar list of measures for Anderson. In the city, they have, you can see here that the state reductions actually reduce their emissions to that 2020 target. There are some additional local actions that are included to fulfill the state recommendations for CEQA streamlining. Reading, shorter list of measures, but a lot of emphasis on the energy and the transportation component. And they achieved their 2020 target in Shasta Lake. Results very similar to the county's list of measures. There are a lot of different details once you get into the measures, but it's the same, fairly similar list anyways at the surface. They also achieved their 2020 target and have like all the other jurisdictions, the 2035 target is not achieved in this plan. Next steps, we're here, it's in the preliminary draft is in the public review period. Basically looking for public feedback and the board's feedback as well as the city council's feedback for the other chapters in the document. Comments from those would be result in a revised public review draft, and that would be brought forward to be adopted by the individual jurisdictions. The board would be, the county board would be responsible for the unincorporated portion of the climate action plan. And then finally, implementation of the climate action plans by the jurisdiction staff. And that just reiterates that it is at the adoption will occur at the individual jurisdiction level. The next steps are CEQA environmental analysis. This is considered a project under the California Environmental Quality Act. Each jurisdiction will have to prepare an environmental analysis to basically show that there's no adverse environmental impacts from the implementation of the climate action plan. Then at that time, with the revised climate action plan, the Board of Supervisors and the city councils could adopt their climate action plans. Staff would implement, and then there is a lot of room for regional coordination. A lot of programs would be much cheaper if all the jurisdictions in the county work together to implement some of the measures, especially the outreach and incentive programs. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Are there any questions at this time? I do also have audience requests to ask questions. Nope. I think we're going to hold off at this point.
Okay.
Thank you. I do have some requests to speak. First was Bart Lovett, but I think he may have left. Maybe he got his in early. So next will be Gary Cadd, followed by Sally Raposa.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff, ladies and gentlemen. I come before you today. I've been studying this issue for probably the last 2 years, and I've done a lot of in-depth studies of different municipalities around and counties around the state that have delved into this issue. Some of them really wish they hadn't done. In May of 2011, this board introduced the Air Quality Management District's Shasta Regional Climate Action Plan, their preliminary measures feasibility worksheet, greenhouse gas reduction measures. Some of these measures included in this document are energy efficient retrofits for existing buildings, energy efficiency appliance in existing buildings, smart grid integration in existing and new buildings, which is smart meter, solar photovoltaic systems, solar hot water heaters, water efficiency retrofits for existing buildings, water conservation, landscape, water reuse, gray water, rainwater, water pricing in building would be a new form, land use with higher densities, commute trip reductions, implementing employee parking cash out, require end-of-trip facilities, it's a rather interesting one, parking policy pricing, implement market-based pricing for public parking spaces, limit parking spaces, unbundle parking costs from property costs, and these are just some of the measures that are included in this document. If an individual couldn't afford to install the retrofit, they could use the PACE program, Property Assessed Clean Energy, administered through CalFirst Commercial Bank, charging interest, and pay the amount back as a line on their property tax bill, creating a year-round lien on their property. The retrofit program, and this is stated in this feasibility worksheet, the retrofit program would be voluntary unless the desired retrofit levels in the community are not achieved by a given date, and in that case, the mandatory energy conservation ordinance would be imposed. This whole climate change, if we do have climate change or not, I think we need to watch ourselves in delving into this feasibility package here. I'd really like to see you folks, look at it and see what's in it. It's quite a document, but what it really does is if you folks put a climate action plan into place, air quality will be adding to that plan. Well, when air quality adds to that plan, this is when these measures will be coming into effect. This, and I think there's also something talking about the toilet tanks and having to restrict the number of gallons in a toilet tank. And then my time's running out, and I wish the public had had more time to be able to speak to this issue. But anyway, I think you get the drift that I would probably say, do not move forward with this, that we really need to be looking at what the real issues are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cab. Sally Raposa, followed by Ed Merrick.
Good morning. I have a problem with the climate action plan because I think it's all based on a hoax. According to a report by the International Panel on Climate Change, which is the IPCC, and that's what I'll refer to it from now on, it's a United Nations organization. And they say that now there is a complete consensus of agreement among scientists that global warming is not only a fact, but that we humans are causing it. Only one problem. The IPCC report is not the one originally written by the scientists. 15 sections were drastically altered in absolute violation of their own rules. All statements indicating the uncertainty about the type and causes of climate change were removed from the report. These were not small, insignificant changes, but deletions, including statements made from the scientists that, quote, none of the studies cited above has shown clear evidence that we can attribute the observed to an anthropogenic or man-made cause. These deletions were designed to create a blatant deception. This deception is not trivial. Analysis have determined that the called for 20% reduction in CO2 emissions from 1998 levels could be achieved with a whopping 50% or more increase in energy costs and the loss of over 2 million jobs. The climate change action plans which you are considering is at first voluntary, but if goals are not reached within a certain time frame, then more encouragement will be applied. And I quote from the climate action plan itself, to create high levels of participation in voluntary measures, a community often needs to make substantial investments in program development, rebates, and other financial incentives. Where's this money going to come from? I've got an answer for you. By selling carbon credits. Recently in Sacramento, I bought a carbon credit. It's a coupon. I bought it for my husband, and it allows him to release gas without being fined or going to jail. This is essentially what AB 32 is all about, forcing businesses to purchase thin air from the state that will allow them to emit gas. My question is, how much carbon is emitted into the air from all the forest fires we've had lately? How much will we have to pay in greenhouse gas reductions to make up for that? In conclusion, California is the only state that has taken man-made climate change seriously. We are showing the rest of the country the way off the financial cliff. California used to be called the Golden State, but our governor and legislatures have bought into the hoax of climate change. Now our once golden state has become the land of fool's gold. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boza. Ed Merrick, followed by Charles Alexander.
Good morning again. And again, just in the same email I sent you earlier and the comment at the climate plan I filed on yesterday, actually, I just want to note that 50-something% of the emissions of carbon dioxide in the county are transportation, and there's no mention of any form of transportation that would reduce those emissions, specifically alternate fuels, electric vehicles. Now, I spoke to, I think it was Adam, on the phone before I made my comments, and he made words to the effect, well, we can count on the market to solve the problem. And I just thought, in line with my comments about charging before, because the cars are ready and you can charge them at home, everything is fine, just want to point out that in terms of the reality of the century, if it is the role of government to lead, follow, or get out of the way, I want to point out how much the government is in the way right now. Two ways to charge. The way I charge at home, I just use regular wall current. All you need is an extension cord. However, government regulation has deemed that this be idiot-proof in terms of safety. So they basically made a $5 extension cord, a $500 EVSE, electric vehicle service equipment. And I support that, actually, because the charging station at Crown Motors or the one at Reading School of the Arts, you can stand in a puddle in the rain, stick it in your mouth, and turn it on, and you won't be harmed. And that's because what makes this expensive is got circuitry that identifies what you plug it in. Yes, I'm an electric car that meets all necessary requirements. And the source of electricity says, yes, I'm 240 volts, properly grounded, blah, blah, blah. So until that happens, nothing happens. Okay, and that's only, like I said, $500. So that's no problem. Don't worry about those. Now, I want to point out as to fast charge stations, you're talking about something very different. The charger is not in the car, it's at the site. It takes, rather than 3 or 6 kilowatts per hour, it's 50 kilowatts per hour, 400 volts. There's a whole different profile in terms of cost and safety. There happens to be one of these within 200 miles of us right now. It's in Vacaville, and this is the classic example. It was installed 3 or 4 years ago, one of the first ones in California. It's perfectly operable. I could use it today if it could be turned on, but it can't, because it was one developed for the Japanese market where 4-year-olds plug it in every day. Well, not if they're driving, but they could do it for their parents. But in this country, it has never been certified by UL Labs. So the only way that can be used now is if PG&E sends out an employee to plug it in for you, which, as you can imagine, is a fairly hard thing to have done. So anyway, thanks for the time, and I just hope that at some point before the final plan is completed, the real possibility of cheaper, better ways than having us all ride bikes and bicycles 50 miles to town will occur to people. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Merrick. Charles Alexander.
Thank you for the opportunity here today to address the Air Pollution Control Board on the matter of the Climate Action Plan. Now, in the presentation, there were reference to the 2035 targets, but interestingly enough, I don't recall reference to the 2050 targets. And the shortest way to describe the 2050 and the 2035 targets is that they're simply not feasible, period. Extraordinary efforts in some jurisdictions, Yellow County in particular, to attempt compliance even with the 2020 targets are currently underway. As for CEQA incentives, those can potentially be withdrawn by the legislature if enough jurisdictions decide to adopt climate action plans. And even with severe mandatory measures at the local level, and even with the most Pollyannish level of optimism concerning certain measures, there is the admission that in the plan there's the admission that the 2035 targets are not possible to be achieved without technical or technologic advances that are simply not anywhere in the pipeline. The 2050 targets, 83% below 2008 levels, not possible to be met without severe population limitation measures, and even then the possibility of achievement is highly speculative. The current document is most certainly an improvement over the 2011 document. However, with the plan being reviewed every 5 years beginning 2015, measures which are voluntary now can be made compulsory very easily, and with more mandatory measures to be added. One measure, the smart meter, is designed specifically to monitor electric usage habits with the possibility of future remote control of those electrical usage habits, such as currently exists in such EU member states as the Netherlands. If you have any relatives who are on life support, in-home life support specifically, such persons would do well to refuse smart meters. And then some measures which in themselves are not bad but create conflict. You have urban forestation conflicting with solar voltaic. Trees absorb CO2, but they cast shadows on solar panels, which are owned by homeowners that may sue the other homeowners to require tree removal. Obviously, tort reform is going to be required to resolve that conflict, and there's more information in the comment that I submitted yesterday. And I see that I'm out of time, but needless to say, the 2035 and 2050 targets are simply not feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. That's all the requests I have to speak at this time. Anybody else? Then we'll bring it back to the board. Questions from the members here? Go. Okay, Supervisor Baugh.
Mr. Modi, Chair Modi, were you going to follow through on some of the public comments in terms of some responses?
Yes.
I would love to hear those first.
Okay. So I don't know if you're going to address those or Mr. Moll, but a couple things were brought up. Like, for instance, the question about existing structures, businesses, homes and stuff, and the retrofit requirements. There was talk about it being voluntary, but there was concern somehow that something would be imposed upon them later. I haven't heard that one, so I just...
Members of the board, Russ Mull, our Pollution Control Officer. In answer to that question, in the reference to 2035 and 2050, I think is actually a pretty accurate representation. This thing doesn't work then. We know that. And that's why we addressed it in the fashion that we did, because something will have to change. If the state wants to increase regulations and force people to do things, that's up to them. If our elected representatives want to do that, that'll be their decision. We can't do that here. Or we could do that, but it's unrealistic to expect that we're going to be able to address certain things like a change in the emissions of a vehicle at the local level. So at some point, you can reasonably expect that there will be an increase in regulations from the state of California if, in fact, they want to continue down this road. The Air Board is not going to be doing anything with this climate action plan beyond this date. You're not reviewing it anymore, you're not adopting it. It's essentially a template that we're giving to the local jurisdictions and allowing them to adopt it if they so choose. If they want to take this first step, they can do that. We see it as a very important component of our economic strategy, in that when a new business comes to town that has emissions, they can look at this thing and say, okay, we're adding X%, therefore we're going to put X dollars into a reduction strategy that will get us here. In other words, we'll buy 500 low energy washing machines or whatever it is, and then they go about their business, rather than sit there and wring their hands and try to decide how they're going to deal with this nebulous greenhouse gas issue. I mean, obviously, we just went through a lengthy 2-year process on greenhouse gases with our energy plant in Anderson, or by Anderson. And so this is an effort to try to make it easier for them. Is it a perfect scenario? No. Is it mandatory? No. Is the Air Board going to do anything more at this point? No. You can conjecture all you want about what's going to become mandatory and what isn't, whether smart meters are coming or whether or not. We don't know the answers to any of those things. All we're trying to do is get our foot in the door so that our economic policy can continue to move forward and we can continue to cite industries in Shasta County and in the incorporated areas if they choose to.
And just for clarification purposes, you said, this board will not adopt it, and you're referring to the Air Pollution
That's
Control
correct.
Board versus the Board of Supervisors or City Councils may choose to do that.
That's
after.
correct.
Okay.
It will not be a mandate of any type unless it's adopted by those individual jurisdictions. What we will be proposing in the unincorporated area is through our planning division. We will be, we're in the process of updating our general plan right now, and we'll be incorporating the climate action plan as part of a new air quality element in that document. And then we'll be bringing that to the Planning Commission and the board as a proposal to include into our document, and there'll be an environmental impact report done at that time, and there'll be all kinds of public input. And then if it gets adopted, it will become a mandate. Whatever gets adopted becomes a mandate in the unincorporated area then, just as it would in the incorporated areas.
So just to clarify then, in reference to the one question about existing homes and businesses and the retrofit and stuff, there is nothing in the plan that requires them to do anything. It's voluntary, and that jurisdictions, whether it be the cities or the county, could down the road choose to do something if they want to, but at this point, you have no inkling of that.
No.
Okay? Because it was talking about management plan being opposed, but that's not part of the Air Pollution Control Board's.
No.
Okay. Second of all, there's talk about climate change and whether that's happening or not. But again, I think you talked about this initially. This is not addressing whether or not there's climate change. This is addressing the state law that's been passed that asked us to try to deal with it in a certain way. I think, as you described, it's very nebulous, and you're trying to develop a plan that will help businesses and help people bring in jobs and follow a plan that at least gets them here versus right now where takes them a 2-year process because it's so convoluted.
Well, you don't want, when people come in the door in a land use agency and they say, what do I need to do? What do I need to do for traffic? What do I need to do for landscaping? What do I need to do for emissions? And if you just shrug your shoulders and say, I don't know, go talk to the legislature and see what they intended with AB 32. You're never going to have anybody come here. I mean, industry is a huge player in this county. Our biomass facilities, our cement kilns, our mining facilities, our timber industry are huge players, and they all have various impacts on greenhouse gases. And so for us to just shrug our shoulders and say, well, let's let Sacramento figure this mess out, we think is a mistake. So we're taking this initial step so that each jurisdiction can hopefully have a heads up and get them into this program before somebody else tells them what they ought to be doing. It's very critical to the unincorporated area. I think it's critical to the incorporated areas, but probably not quite so much. And so they've got a little different strategies than we do. It's important to the city of Reading because they have power plants that are affected by greenhouse gas laws. And so it varies from city to city, so they'll have their own decisions to make, but it's very important for the unincorporated area.
But I think it's important to note that it's going to be decided at the local level, each
Yes.
local jurisdictional level.
Yes, that's correct.
And the last question, I think it came up, and then I'll go back to Supervisor Ball if you want to ask your questions, was there was a concern or comment about electric cars and charging stations. Is that something that falls under this purview, or is this something that a local jurisdiction could look at, but it's not, does that fall in there somewhere?
It can certainly be added as this process goes on in individual jurisdictions. There's all kinds of issues with electric vehicles right now that are problematic. In fact, there was an article in the paper just yesterday or the day before about how the Chevy Volt is being subsidized to the tune of about $30,000. So it's pretty hard to imagine an industry making a profit into the future, losing 30 grand every car they produce. So
It's something that the county's not going to install. It's something you're looking at private business would install.
most likely, although it's certainly not beyond the realm of believability to put in an electrical charging station at a city or a county. That's done pretty routinely now. It's a fact that the electric vehicle technology isn't such that it's practical to expect a lot of them are going to be purchased to make it cost effective to put one in.
Right.
Now, that's not to say down the road or in a city, it wouldn't make great sense, but in an unincorporated area with the state of technology on electric vehicles now, it's just not super practical. But will it be practicable in 2035? Yeah, maybe. And they can figure it out in 2035.
Okay. Supervisor Hawes.
Well, you mentioned washing machines. Wood stoves certainly would fall into this category too, I would think.
Well, wood stoves are more of a particulate issue, PM 2.5 and PM 10. And as you recall, when they were going to build the power plant in Bernie, the new merchant plant, which went by the by for financial reasons, they purchased new wood stoves for everyone who had an old wood stove in Bernie. It was like 400 wood stoves or something. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. They were required to offset their particulate emissions, and one of the things they said is, we'll replace everybody's old wood stove. And for the Energy Commission, they worked with the Energy Commission to accomplish that. So that's kind of what we're talking about. Somebody comes in, they've got some proposal, they need to know how they can meet the CEQA guidelines and get their impacts below a significant level. And this will give them sort of a roadmap to do that.
And it might be worth a note that we just approved another plan this morning to help with people with wood stoves.
Yes, we did.
Calendar, so.
Well, the Air District has had a program now for, 6 or 7 years, I believe, where we provide incentives for people to change out their old wood stoves with EPA certified stoves to reduce our particulate emissions. So those are the kind of programs that you'll see. REU has all kinds of, the electrical utility has all kinds of incentives that come up, or rebates, or whatever you want to call it, that would typically be associated with reducing emissions from their power plants, or reducing usage for power, thereby reducing emissions. We no longer are totally fed by hydroelectric power. I mean, we're burning gas in a lot of places, including Reading, and our power plants, even our biomass plants on occasion run on gas. And so those are fairly large greenhouse gas contributors. And so when somebody comes in with a plan like that, they need to offset those emissions.
Supervisor Baugh.
Thank you, Chair Modi. Mr. Mull, would you address Mr. Cad's reference to the feasibility document?
I think that was one that was early on with a whole bunch of just kind of everything that anybody could think of that other jurisdictions had done. I don't think that made it very far through the process because most of those aren't in the document. So I believe that was an early document. Yeah.
Would you maybe add a little more insight to the parallel work, somewhat parallel work of the Shasta Transportation Agency?
Can I?
Do you want to?
I don't know if I can or not because I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. At this point, what they're mandated to do is prepare a sustainable community strategy, which is a document that by law is required to be based on local planning documents. In other words, it's supposed to be consistent with what the local jurisdictions are doing. And so when they ultimately prepare that document, the theory will be that they will work with the local jurisdictions to make that, it's for transportation, it's for vehicle, reducing vehicle miles traveled. They will have a document that has all kinds of strategies similar to this, but primarily based on transportation issues. And so we don't have any information because they haven't done anything. They've gotten a few grants and they've done a few peripheral items, but I don't believe they've started work on the plan at all.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to understand the process here. And as you're aware, I sit on the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency Board as well. There has been a thought process proposed that we as the county Air Pollution Control Board can simply ignore this process. Stop what we're doing, not receive your report. Certainly, I think the intention was that the county Board of Supervisors would possibly not incorporate any of this into our general plan, if I'm hearing the thoughts that are being presented correctly. If we choose to not review, to not consider, will that stop the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency from moving forward?
No, because they're mandated to move forward. What I think you'll see is a plan, at least on the transportation components and land use components associated with it, that's been shaped in Sacramento. And the reason for that is because the money to do it is coming from Sacramento. And so it's reasonable to conclude that the providers of the money are going to have things weighted towards their desires. And so if we do nothing, I would expect a plan that's been pretty heavily influenced by Sacramento.
Which I think is a fair statement to make. We have the choice of locally, and I'll use the word controlling our destiny, as opposed to the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency through Sacramento boilerplate, basically, so perhaps suggesting our destiny. One of the two are going to be adopted, if I understand your comments correctly. If we eventually adopt, and I know we're not having that discussion today, you're saying that they are forced to then take into consideration this document.
Well, I think that they have to take in all the local planning documents.
Okay.
I don't think it's just strictly limited to this one, and they would be foolish not to. However, if you were to look at a document created from scratch, it would look pretty similar to what we're doing here, but they could take a document like the one you just held up, and that could be their proposals. And that could be adopted by the RTPA board, independent of the jurisdictions. Admittedly, we have representatives, but it's represented by multiple jurisdictions. It could be adopted, and it could be a document that we would have to live with if we didn't have our own document. And that's why we're doing what we're doing here.
Thank you.
Supervisor Keel.
Thank you, Chair Modi. Mr. Mull, I found this document to be well-written and practical. I think under the section having to do with the Shasta approach, there is a very powerful statement here, and I'd like to read that statement in brief. It goes as follows. This plan reflects the reality of Shasta County today. While the jurisdictions are serious about supporting statewide emissions reduction targets, local efforts need to be compatible with supporting a strong local economy and protecting the personal freedom of Shasta County residents and businesses. I appreciate that statement. Thank you.
You're welcome. You probably won't see that in any other document. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think I have a couple, but first, we have a representative from the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency, and he'd like to answer the question I think that perhaps that you're raising, so maybe that will clear something up. Sean?
Good morning, Chair Modi and Board. Sean Tejan, Associate Transportation Planner with the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency. Just to come up and quickly address the comments by Supervisor Baugh regarding SB 375 and what the Shasta Regional Transportation Planning Agency is required to do versus the RCAP process. I think you have our comments from our comment letter that we provided and reviewed. Just I think for a little bit of so the public has a little understanding of what the two differences are, is that the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency, or SRTA as we call ourselves, is legally obligated to undergo related but quite different effort than the RCAP. We're required under Senate Bill 375 to examine transportation policies that could reduce travel, thereby reducing travel costs and vehicle emissions. Regarding to this, we are having to, it is true as presented that the SB 375 has no teeth for local jurisdictions, but it does have teeth for the MPO for the region, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which SRTA serves as. It requires us to have to look at transportation emissions and related to land use, and have to look at providing potentially measures that might be feasible or may not be feasible in our regional transportation plan. By incorporating those measures in our regional transportation plan, that will allow us to be able to have a document that the feds will recognize, which will allow us eligible for transportation dollars. Without a regional transportation plan that is vetted through the federal agencies, we will not be eligible for getting those transportation dollars that we so heavily need to improve our roads and our bridges system. We noticed that a lot of the measures may or may not be developed in the RTP process. We will be looking to work with the local jurisdictions. It will be up to them to help advise us on what measures are feasible. If they're feasible, we will present them as part of that policy. If not, we won't include them. SB 375 requires us to see if we can meet the Air Resources Board requirement that is put on us to look at greenhouse gas emissions. What our requirement is to look at is whether we can reduce GHG emissions from light vehicles, from vehicles and light trucks by 2020 to 0% per capita, which when we've looked at that may mean that we may actually have a net increase in GHG emissions. When you look at that, we'll be evaluating that through the process. We're just starting in preliminary work on our RTP, and that will be done and finalized in 2015. That's all we have.
Thank you, Sean. Any other board comments? Then I'll just add mine. First of all, as far as the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency, I agree with Supervisor Baugh that we want to be careful not to let the state give us a boilerplate plan, because sometimes they surely try to do that. But I do believe it's the desire of the board to keep the decisions local, as Sean talked about, have our own jurisdictions give us input, make those decisions based on what we think is needed for our area, so that we don't have something from the state just sent down the road like some of the other things they've done to us as well. As I read through the plan, the climate action plan, what I see is as explained by Mr. Mull, is that it's really our effort to deal with the state again. They have, once again, passed the law, passed legislation to say you've got to do certain things, and if we don't put something in place to help interpret and guide our businesses and the people who live here who want to do things, they're at the mercy of the state. And this, I think, is a great job of trying to level that playing field for them a little bit so they know what they're getting into when they want to do a project. It gives them a course to follow. It gives them some way to accomplish their goals that help our local community and meet the needs of our local community, at the same time keeping the state at bay a little bit as with their long-reach mandates that they put upon us. So I think it's a great document. I think you've done a great job, Mr. Mull, and your staff. I congratulate you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation today. Anything further for the board? Then we are adjourned. Thank you.